Hey, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning. This is a special edition of Aragon Live with yours truly, Jim Lundy, Adam Pease, Craig Kennedy, and we are here to talk about ChatGPT, what it is, why it's going crazy with demand, and how the big providers and little providers are racing because to do something to try to show value, or at least the fact that they know ChatGPT and oh look, we work with it too. So we're going to take it slow. We're going to dive into it. First, I mentioned Craig Kennedy, Adam Pease. You guys know me. I'm the founder and CEO of Aragon. Adam, Craig, great to have you with us. Obviously, we do this every week for clients that know us. We do a video podcast every single week. But since this is a special edition, Craig, introduce yourself, tell the audience a little about yourself, and then Adam will do you.
Sure. Craig Kennedy, I've been with Aragon Research for a couple of years now. Loving it. My background is more in the development, running development teams, running IT operations teams here in Silicon Valley for the last 20 plus years. Very steeped in IT operations. It's probably the deepest thing I've been in. Bring that to the table.
And you also cover conversational AI.
So coverage at Aragon, I cover conversational AI, which is really up the league here for what we're talking about.
Part of the discussion we're going to talk about today, right?
Pretty cool.
Adam, go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, so my name's Adam Pease. I've been at Aragon for a little over 3 years now. And as an analyst, my focus area started out with computer vision and quickly got into content AI. And content AI has been a big focus for me alongside computer vision AI. It got me to start writing about generative content a little over a year ago. Was really intrigued to see what OpenAI was doing with GPT-2, GPT-3, and DALL-E 2, all these sort of systems. And then obviously now they've really knocked it out of the park with ChatGPT. So yeah, I'm excited to get into it with you guys.
So look, we've all three of us have written blogs. So if you follow our weekly blog series, we all have blogs about it. But we're trying to just to condense it down to really kind of talk about it. And we want to talk about what ChatGPT is from OpenAI. Craig, you want to start kicking us off a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So ChatGPT, developed by OpenAI, it's being run on Microsoft Azure cloud platform. OpenAI and Microsoft have a very tight partnership. Microsoft early on invested about $1 billion into OpenAI and just recently invested 10 billion and formed a partnership with them. But ChatGPT is a GPT 3.5 based large language model. It's all artificial neural network based, transformer based, and it was trained on massive amounts of data out of the Azure cloud. So it has knowledge on a lot of different things. It's one of the few artificial intelligence tools that you can ask a question and it will have a conversation with you. I think that's really what's taken the world by storm over the last couple of months is people didn't realize this technology even existed. And so it's been a big eye opener for a lot of people.
So Adam, so you cover generative content. So one of the things I think that struck people, and you hit on it a little bit, Craig, was the fact that it could generate responses, very quickly, but also the intelligence of the response, the completeness of the response, I think took people, like shocked people. And so since you've been covering the ability of, computer applications to generate content, can you talk a little bit about why the shock and awe from people about this?
Yeah, definitely. So it's interesting, Jim, because actually there's a funny comment from the CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman, recently. He was being interviewed and he commented that the capabilities to build a system like ChatGPT had been available through their API, that someone else could have taken advantage of their existing models and built a similar system for something like 6 months. And they were surprised that it took someone this long to come along. And I think part of the secret there is this approach they use called reinforcement learning with human feedback, where they essentially have a huge team of human reviewers that they get to process the outputs of a generative model. And like I said, these models have been good for a while. They haven't been 3.5 good, but they've been very good for over a year now. But what they were lacking was this human reviewer who would go in and tell the model, this is a really helpful way of phrasing something. This is not so helpful of a way of phrasing something. And with enough of that human feedback training, which doesn't even really require big data to do, like they were saying, a startup could have done this with their existing pre-trained large models. With enough of that human feedback, you can really coax this thing into being a great natural language conversational agent, and also to producing a lot of enterprise ready content that it just previously didn't really have it wasn't quite hitting the structure that people wanted, when they were going to generative content to try and make a blog post or write an email campaign. And so I think that they really figured out an approach that makes this stuff feel business ready in a way that it definitely did not about a year ago.
Yeah, just for the audience, Adam talked about reinforcement learning. So that is reinforcement learning is a form of deep learning that basically can, learn, with lots of data, get much better at understanding the fidelity, for example, of a good response versus the bad response, and do it fairly quickly. So the humans were directing traffic. I think that's one of the things when they did some of that training, the system got smarter. Not necessarily exponentially, but maybe geometrically faster. So again, the feverish response. So one of the things that Craig, you covered conversational AI. One of the things I observed is that it's the way you prompt it, and then it gives you an answer, but it's not necessarily talking to you all the time. It will respond to your question, either like, I don't do that, or I'm not programmed to do that. So now there's people that have command prompts that are actually publishing those. Of, here's a way to ask it a technical question. Here's a way to get it to actually, for example, pretend you are a developer, or a reviewer or that. And that sometimes unleashes the platform to look up and answer honestly. Whereas if you just said, tell me the difference between these two things, I don't really cover that. I'm not really trained to do that. So you kind of have to go under the veil. But the one thing with, true conversational AI, it's supposed to be able to have a conversation with you. It doesn't ask you after it pumps out the answer. It's not asking, hey, did you like that? It doesn't do that, right?
It doesn't do that. However,
it could do it.
What's interesting is that it does persist the knowledge that you've gone and the questions you've asked and what it's told you, and you can get it to refine its answers. So it's not just here's a one-time response. It's I'm having a dialogue back and forth. So it does learn from that.
It will learn from that. So that's the other thing. It's not a one and done like many chatbots, but it's actually doing more. And it's got a very large, Adam, to your point, it's got a very large data set. So really shock and awe, the term I use is like, just people went crazy, right? People went crazy. So we wrote about it in the early days, but it got better, and actually better, I think, relative to people feeling comfortable with having it do things.
Yeah, it does.
And now there's a premium version. So we're going to talk about the landscape in a little bit. We're just trying to ground the conversation around this. So I've covered search for a long time, and there are some threats to people like Google. But the big thing, I think, when you actually look at the way search worked, it was taking you to a page and it had all the info, right? And now what it's doing is it's giving you the answer instead of giving you a page where you have to go look up the answer. So that's a different experience. And that's a threat to traditional search. Now, we've talked about AI enhanced search here at Aragon for a while. We have had different, ways to describe it, pattern matching and things like that. But this is going way beyond that, where it actually has a base of knowledge, and it can write. The ChatGPT-3 can write answers.
It can write to the point where within a week of ChatGPT coming out, I had ChatGPT write a blog that I put my name on and put a note at the very bottom saying this was not written by me. But it wrote a very convincing 400-word blog that was pretty effective.
Yeah, so
and that's up on our site.
We've always all tried that. I could try to get it to, I got it to answer a comparison question for me on Macs versus Windows laptops. It did a great job. I compared it with, Google's Assistant, which is, that's the name of their product, Google Assistant. One link. It sent me to one link. Apple gave me Siri a multiple set of links that were actually pretty good. Had about the same info on it as the ChatGPT, but ChatGPT gave it to me right away. I didn't have to go look.
Yeah.
I didn't have to process, it was like right there. And it felt pretty cool to me. So I think the feeling of, oh my God, this is real. I think that's the one thing that's caught so many people off guard and created this fevered pitch of, I have to do something with ChatGPT.
It's almost addictive at this point. It's one of the fastest growing social media companies out there, TikTok. It took them 9 months to get to 100 million users. ChatGPT got to 1 million in a few days. It got to over 100 million in less than 2 months. So phenomenal.
It's fast ramp rate, a lot of interest. We did catch it, maybe taking some stuff off of some proprietary language we have on our website on one topic. I won't say which one. There's already been challenges made by some of the image copyright owners, like an artist or Getty, saying that it's just doing derivative work, which it may be doing. So transition a little bit. So, you mentioned it. OpenAI has been around for more than a few years. And lo and behold, in 2019, Microsoft made an investment in OpenAI.
Yep, $1 billion.
But before we talk about it, we've talked about OpenAI, ChatGPT. We're going to talk about Microsoft, but let's talk about the big gorilla in the room, which is someone called Google. So Google pretty much is number one in search, for public search. Google is pretty much number one in ad revenue from search, right? And if you go to do a Google search, you're used to the way it answers, but now there's more, search results that are ads than I've ever seen in my life. So you sometimes got to go to page 2, page 3, but the perception is with a flopped demo. So here's what happened is ChatGPT, as Craig said, you go all the way to February, so you're almost into 37, 38 days, and boom, actually, excuse me. You're at 67, 68 days because it was early December. So, boom, all of a sudden, Google announces Bard. And Bard is supposed to be a ChatGPT-like thing based off the Lambda project that they have, where one engineer from Google described it as too intelligent. It was like close to, like a little
Sentient,
like a little kid. And it knew when you're asking it a trick question, it would answer with a funny answer. So that's pretty amazing. But, a lot of the announcements we've seen so far from Google, and, not to pick on Microsoft, but they're prototype demos or basically, early preview demos, not ready for prime time. All Google showed was a pre-canned demo, right? A pre-canned question with an answer, and they answered it wrong. There's substantial impacts to Google down the road. Potentially, we're going to stop there and come back. Microsoft, now they invested, as you said, Craig, $1 billion in 2019.
2019, yeah.
And I think they're in the process of finishing up a $10 billion.
They are.
So, Adam, you think the reason that, first of all, Microsoft very competitive, but the data set that they got access to with the tie-up with Azure, I think that's one of the things that's
Huge.
made it so huge, right? The data set.
I think a huge aspect of it is the data set, and they've really been the difference between someone like a Google and or a DeepMind in Google and someone like an OpenAI is that OpenAI has really been chipping away at this specific problem in terms of generative natural language, communication that could be used for search or for content generation, as we've seen. They've really been chipping away at this problem for years, and they've been working the hardest at it. And they take all this data and they get some of the smartest research engineers in AI and they put them to the task of the problem of making large language models. And while Google has had a huge role to play research-wise,
lost Adam's audio there.
Well, we're gonna probably have to stitch this back together. Adam,
can you hear me now?
We can.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. I guess
we had a little stitch. Keep going. Just you were talking about the investment, the engineers.
Right. So they've been chipping away at this problem for a long time, and Google, while they've contributed hugely to the field of large language models with the Transformer paper, with stuff like the BERT model and the Palm model, which have been used in search, they haven't really had a lot of experience trying to take these things to market even for beta users, which is something OpenAI has been doing for years. And OpenAI has, a healthy user base in terms of its APIs for large language models, whereas Google has kept these things locked up basically until now, when they're still only letting some beta testers into Bard. And so I really think it's the difference of Microsoft partnered with someone who just has a lot of experience delivering large language model based products to users, even if not at this scale yet. Like, they have the experience, and Google hasn't really tried to take these things out of a research setting.
Yeah, the really interesting part on that, Adam, and you nailed it. Google has done some breakthrough AI models. I mean, the whole large language model, transformative large language models, and artificial neural network, it all came out of Google, and
Right.
that's being used by OpenAI to develop products.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So let's go back to talk about, first of all, Google. And Google is had a code red situation in December. They announced Bard. Bard's not ready for prime time. They have a lot of product engineering to productize it. I think that's the expertise. Microsoft has better product, product management that can convert an idea into a hardened product. So that's part of the race. And what's up for grabs is, new refreshed products. So let's talk about, my good old Microsoft browser, which is the Edge browser. They're going to update the Edge browser, try to get you to use the Edge browser, but they're also updating Bing.
Yep.
And this is in advance of their big thing, which is embedding it in Microsoft 365 with Word. But that's not ready yet. So right now it's the new Bing, and you can sign up for that. And the new, Edge browser that will help power some of these experiences. Um, and then, like I said, you got Google. And then the other thing, which is this fevered race of all these providers saying, we're going to ship something with ChatGPT. So for everybody listening to this, one thing I'm going to throw out as a piece of advice is ChatGPT, 3.5, is an open system, right? It takes stuff in and puts stuff out.
Mhm.
So if you're putting your proprietary data into ChatGPT, then other people have access to it.
Mhm.
So when you look at Microsoft's Azure version, that you can wall garden that off, right? So that you can protect your IP. And my prediction is more people will go with that version, the commercial version, versus this basically consumer data collection. Because when you put stuff into ChatGPT, it's going to get smarter,
Mhm.
right? It's going to get smarter. So some thoughts on that, team. What do you guys think about that whole thing? I mean, there's this whole race. We're advising people not to jump and use the open AI version of ChatGPT. But I think it's important that they realize search is changing, products are changing, interactive feedback, all that. But how are enterprises going to get there? Do you think they're going to go with like the Microsoft Azure version, or what are they going to do?
You know, this whole space is so much of it in its infancy right now. If you look at Satya's comments when they first announced Bing and ChatGPT, he's on a pace to start making innovation every day. I mean, he's thinking of this as a race, and it really is a race. It's a race between Microsoft and Google right now. And I think the advice to enterprises is take a breath, look at this over the course of the next few weeks to months, and there's going to be solutions coming out of Microsoft that will be very commercially viable. I think that's where it's going. And I agree with you, Jim. I think that if it was me, I think Microsoft has the commercial world. That's where their business is. Google is all about development. I think that Microsoft is probably going to have some really good, serious security products that have this technology built into it, but keeps your data secure.
Well, before we jump and say it's all Microsoft, let's talk about Adam, Bard. Can you talk to me about Bard a little bit? What you saw?
Yeah, Bard was interesting because I think that and I mentioned this in the blog a little bit, and there's been a little press about Google supposedly having lost some market cap after the announcement, and people are speculating, that traders and shareholders aren't so happy about it, and some have pointed to the fact that, as you mentioned earlier, there was, apparently a factual error. They asked it to generate some info about the James Webb Satellite Telescope, and it said that it said something that sounded very wrong to a lot of the people watching. And some people think that's why people are unhappy with Bard. Some people also just think they didn't really bring a lot to the table compared to ChatGPT. At best they brought to the table what appears to be a slightly less good version of ChatGPT. And the real issue with these things, though, Jim, is that as anyone who's used ChatGPT a little bit knows, it's not perfect either, and it will make mistakes, and you can't count on it to be right about everything. And especially if you're trying to do some programming or trying to answer a very important, technical question, it may give you bad information. And so you don't really get that sense, though, until you've spent a little time with it. And in general, with these new chatbot AIs, you really need to be able to spend time with it to realize if the provider is not just cherry picking a set of results to show people, as a demo. It's very hard to say, I guess, is what I'm saying, how good Bard actually is right now. All we can really say is that it didn't feel like the most impressive performance from Google. And I think a lot of people were expecting them to pull out more stops, but it came off as underwhelming to a lot of people. And the other thing is, as you mentioned with the 365, it's Google isn't pitching this as a fundamental. I think Bill Gates said it's the most important thing since the internet. And so it's like Microsoft is really pitching this as a fundamental reinvention of a lot of their products, and Google isn't quite doing that with Bard.
Yep, that's fair.
Yeah.
It felt like Google's presentation was rushed. I mean, that's really what it felt
Well,
like.
it was rushed. And again, I think when you've lived off of the money from the ad revenue truck for so long,
Yeah.
and there's a new menu. Wait a minute, how do we adapt our menu?
Mhm.
Right. They were not ready for that.
Mhm.
And some of you that are listening to this may remember just a couple years back where Google announced this new chatbot service that could schedule appointments for you. It was amazing, and we wrote about it. And guess what? There was a lot of human back end,
Mhm.
and they didn't tell us that.
And it didn't go anywhere.
It did not go to a single place. So I think the big thing is competition. Microsoft has been studying this, is prepared, and Google totally was caught flat-footed, and they need to get their act together. However, culturally, they've been hesitant to sometimes release their best stuff.
Mhm.
It's almost like they don't want to let not going to let the baby go to school. They're going to keep it at homeschool it. They keep their best stuff for their revenue-driven product, which is search.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, with the Office 365 insertion for Google Workspace, they could end up playing catch up again. And instead of leading,
Right.
now they were first with some of the type ahead stuff in Google Docs, where it could
Yeah.
predict and adapt to your style. So they don't talk about that much. And then Microsoft added that later. Google did one up them on that one.
Mhm.
But there's still kind of a long way to go in this race. And again, if you're an enterprise, you should be careful about, where do you go? I think it's a pause to, you were saying, Craig, that wait till you see what they really have and what it's going to cost to integrate, because they will be charging you per word, per character. How much is that going to cost on a 1 month contract, a 2 month contract? How many actions a day are you going to have? But most importantly, what's the use case? So there's a lot of people online sticking their finger down through it like, oh, it's just plagiarism. It's just, it's not really generative content. It's just LLM. However, it's changing the world. It's going to change the world. It's going to change search. And it's going to be a war for generative experiences that are conversational in nature. And this is a new space. It's a new space. So
We don't have web browsing anymore.
yeah, well, I mean, so that's the thing is you're typing this stuff right now, but you can probably talk to it.
Yeah.
But for it to spit it out, we'd have to read that to you. So that's why to have a display, it could spit it out. But let's put it this way: this truly innovation. Again, some technical people are kind of poo-pooing it, not that good, but it is that good because it does it so fast.
Yeah, it's interactive. right?
So,
It works.
hey, we've been going on here for a little while. We're going to do our lightning round to wrap this up. So let's just talk about what's your advice to clients to do about ChatGPT and what's coming from Google and what's coming from Microsoft. What should enterprises do? Frank, let's start with you.
I think from a Google standpoint, keep an eye on Google's technology. Google has deep tech. They've proven that they have issues with go-to-market and being able to bring technology into the consumer's hands. But when they do, usually they deliver some pretty cool stuff. So this might be a big wake-up call from Microsoft to Google to say, guys, let's put a big ribbon around this and let's figure out something where we can bring something to the consumer and to the enterprise. On the Microsoft side, if I look at the direction that Microsoft is going in with engaging the ChatGPT technology into Bing and into Edge to the point where you have generative content as you interact with the World Wide Web and get answers back as opposed to a series of links, that's transformational. That will change how we interact with the internet.
Yes, it will. Adam, what's your take? What should enterprises do?
Yeah, well, I would totally second Craig's advice, and I would say don't rush into anything or dedicate a ton of money before these providers really clarify their price point and roll out these full packages, because a lot of these tools are still in the early stages, and it's a good time to experiment with how they might fit your particular use case and needs, but not a good time to double down. And I also think that the one other piece of advice I would add is that for any specialized use case, for any case where you have data that you can bring a decent amount of data to the AI to sort of train it on your use case, the tools for doing this kind of fine tuning on ChatGPT and on things like Bard and models like this, these are going to be rolled out, in the next 3 to 6 months through the Azure OpenAI services or the OpenAI API, and you're going to be able to take these tools, which are very general right now, and apply them a lot more specifically to your organization's data in the near future. So that's another thing to be aware of, is a lot of the use cases are still kind of coming online because that back-end infrastructure isn't quite there yet, but it will be soon.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm going to agree with what both of you said, but I think the other thing to throw out here relative to AI in general is there's a lot of other algorithms. There's a lot of open source things like, TensorFlow, where you can start training data on it and deploying different algorithms. And so I think this thing opens up the fact that look what they did, and they didn't have to work that hard to do it. So, do your product managers, do your engineers feel comfortable doing this? Can you use some of the new technology like GPUs that run in the cloud or run on a server to speed up the processing? Stuff that we've been talking about for a long time. So the art of the possible. It's not just about this one thing around, ChatGPT and the different algorithms they're using. There's also the whole LLM thing, which a lot of people are talking about as far as, kind of a form of reinforcement around knowledge. So there's a lot of other ways to do this. However, you have to be comfortable with some of those ways. This is one of the wake-up calls, which is look what's possible. I was out on the road. I may have mentioned at the beginning of the thing, and I saw yesterday, actually in Seattle, a coffee place where you could basically put your coffee under a scanner and not push anything. It tells you what it is, how much it costs. You put your credit card in, and you pay. By the way, that was a British company, right? Costa Coffee, and that's going to be more and more commonplace. But so the race to the intelligent enterprise is something we talk about a lot. ChatGPT is a proof point along the way of what could be possible. But a lot of AI is free. TensorFlow is free. A lot of algorithms are free. You can download them from Apache. So consider alternatives. That's my advice. Consider the alternatives of how to make your applications intelligent. You might be able to go faster than you think.
And stay abreast of the technology because it's changing very quickly.
And if you want to know more, then you should sign up with Aragon, because we have calls like this with clients every day. And, to be honest, we've been kind of suggesting they should take a little go or slow approach so they understand what data is where and who owns what. But start planning, what would your service look like if it's intelligent? Start doing that. We talk about this. We actually had a webcast yesterday on Aragon Live, but this is one we just call our special edition because there's actually a lot going on. So I want to thank Adam and Craig for jumping on a Friday afternoon here in Silicon Valley to do this quick Aragon Live on the ChatGPT wars. So this,
thanks so much, guys.
thanks a lot, Adam. Thanks, Craig. Happy weekend, people, and we'll be talking to you again soon. Thank you.
Take care, guys.